This is It's a Mystery Podcast. Let us tell you a story. Hello, mystery readers. Welcome to episode 77 of It's a Mystery Podcast. I'm mystery author Alexandra Amor, and welcome to the show. Today I have an interview for you with an author named Cat Clayton. And Cat writes quirky, cozy mysteries set in the heart of Texas. And given the circumstances that the world finds itself in these days, I think you're really going to enjoy both this interview with Cat and also the books. She's going to share an audiobook clip with you, so you'll hear us say hello, and then you're going to hear a part of the first chapter from the first book in that series, How to Leash a Thief, narrated professionally. So that's pretty cool. And then we'll get into the interview after that. And so, yeah, as I record this, it is Sunday, March 15th, 2020. And I imagine that many of us are feeling pretty challenged by the circumstances that we find ourselves in these days with the virus that's spreading around the world. I know things have really dramatically changed just in the last 7 or 8 days since I recorded the last introduction. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things since I've got your ear. And the first thing is, I just wanted to remind you about your resilience and your wholeness and your wellness that's at the center of you. It can be really easy to be distracted, I guess, preoccupied with the things that are seem to be going wrong or are going wrong. And so I just wanted to point you kind of back in the direction of just reminding you about the fact that you are resilient and you will be able to figure out what to do in any given circumstance. Someone reminded me today on Facebook that our ancestors, our grandparents, perhaps great-grandparents, depending on how old you are, were called to war. And, I personally have relatives who were in that circumstance. I think about the time that basically all of Europe went through, during the First and Second World War, but especially I think about London and the Blitz in the Second World War and how resilient those people were. And so I know that's true for us as well, that we are all resilient. And so on that note, what I thought we could do is I'm going to share a few of my favorite comfort things. So these are books, of course, and podcasts, and maybe a little bit of TV as well. Because if we're going to be stuck at home, perhaps, in isolation, I personally know someone who's quarantined herself because she just happened to be traveling for the last week. When she left Canada, things weren't as bad, and then they went bad very quickly. And she's had to turn around and put her vacation on hold and come back to Canada. So she's going to put herself in quarantine. So yeah, let's just, if we're feeling a little anxious, a little concerned about what's going on, maybe we could just focus on sharing the things with each other that comfort us. And so I thought I'd get that ball rolling. Some of these you've probably heard me talk about before, but I'll repeat them, a few of them in case you haven't heard about them. So let's start with books, of course, mystery novels, which have always been a great deal of comfort for me. Dick Francis is one of my favorite authors. He was a British author. He was a jockey, first a horse racing jockey. That was his first career. And then he went into writing mystery thrillers. If you haven't heard of him, I highly recommend all his books. They tend to be standalone. There are a couple that repeat the same main character, but they're brilliant. And they're mostly set in the world of British horse racing. And I turn back to them again and again. And then this is both a book and a TV recommendation. There's a Canadian author named Giles Blunt, who I adore, and he writes a series of mystery novels set in a fictional town in Ontario that's based on North Bay, and it's called Algonquin Bay, and the main character's name is John Cardinal. He's a police detective, and that actually has also been turned into a TV series. And season 4 is just about to air. I think it's going to air in April 2020. So if you want to get caught up, you've got 3 amazing seasons of TV that you can watch. Just brilliant. It's so well done and so close to the books. And I just loved the TV series. It aired, of course, in Canada here on CTV. So I don't know where you might find it streaming, but everything is streaming these days. So I'm sure you'll be able to find it somewhere. The TV show is called Cardinal. And the books, Giles Blunt's books begin with a book called 40 Words for Sorrow, which is just gorgeous and lovely. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't recommend my dear beloved Cynthia Herod Eagles, another British author. She writes a series of police procedurals, and the detective is a man named Bill Slider. And there's a whole bunch of those. So if it turns out that you like them, you're in for a treat, because there's about 25 of them. And the first one is called Orchestrated Death. And she's actually I follow her on Facebook, and I think there's a publisher that's been sort of slowly putting the books out again. Maybe they went out of print or something, in mass market paperback. So they should be fairly easy to find if you decide that you want to check those out. So those are just some book recommendations. And what books have you loved over the years? Maybe you could, if you need some comfort, just go back and read an old favorite. I often do that when I'm feeling a little bit low. And then as for podcasts, since you're listening to this one, I'll mention a couple of my favorites. And they're kind of all over the map. So a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So one of my favorites is My Favorite Murder, which is a true crime comedy podcast. Very well known. So you might know about that one, hosted by Georgia Hardstark and Karen Kilgariff. I just love it. And I re-listen to those episodes usually when I'm cooking or cleaning the kitchen, just because those two ladies are so funny and I just love it. I love their chemistry. It's amazing. And then lately I've also been listening to one called Terrible, Thanks for Asking. And it's actually about grief and loss, which doesn't sound very comforting at all. But what I realize is that because it's about those subjects, it's again, underneath that, the theme running through it is again resilience, and how resilient and resourceful we are as human beings, even when the worst possible things happen to us. Changing gears slightly, another one I listened to recently that I really liked is called Disorganized Crime, Smuggler's Daughter. And that one's about a woman who recently found out that her parents were pot smugglers all while she was growing up in California. And it's a limited series. So I think there's maybe, I want to say 10 or 12 episodes. And she goes through the whole arc of her father's business and the downtimes and the terrible things that happened and some of the funny things that happened as well, and what that life was like for her dad and mom while they were in that business, especially during the 80s when it was very dangerous, when having just a tiny bit of marijuana was a felony crime. So very, very interesting, fascinating. And then finally, on the topic of resistance, I love the podcast called Changeable with Dr. Amy Johnson. So I highly recommend that one. And then I just thought I'd recommend a couple of TV shows and movies. Something that I'm watching a lot of these days on Netflix is a TV show from Britain called Big Dreams, Small Spaces. And it's a gardening show. I kid you not. So the host is a fellow named Monty Don, who, if you're British, you're probably screaming at your app right now in acknowledgement. Monty is a lovely, gracious, just a lovely man. He's a master gardener, and so he helps real people to put together the gardens of their dreams. And very often the gardens are really tiny, hence the name of the show. So it's just lovely. It's on Netflix. There's several seasons, not a ton of episodes in each season, but still really great. Another show that I always recommend if people are looking for comfort that people haven't really necessarily heard of is called Playing House. And it was on the USA Network in the US. And I think you can find it streaming now. I think it might be on Amazon Prime. And it is a show about two women, best friends, who get together. One of them gets pregnant, but her marriage falls apart. And so they start to live together and support one another through that experience. It's very funny, very sweet. It's one of those shows just about nice people being nice to one another, helping each other out, but hilarious. And I've watched that over and over and over again. I just love it. It stars Jessica St. Clair and Lennon Parham. So you can check that out. Parks and Recreation is another favorite for me. Mike and Molly, that's another one too. I love little short comedies about, nice people doing nice things. And at this point in time in history, I think that's pretty important. It is to me anyway. And then finally, I'll shut up soon, but finally, the last thing I want to recommend is a couple of movies that I find so comforting, and I return to them again and again, but they're ones that people haven't necessarily heard of. They weren't necessarily very popular when they came out. So the first is called Cousins, and it stars Ted Danson and Isabella Rossellini, and it's from, I want to say, the early 90s. It's a romantic comedy, absolutely gorgeous and delightful, and just amazing. I love that movie. I even love the music from it. It's so beautiful. And then the second one is a movie called Saving Grace, which was written by Craig Ferguson. He's the Scottish fellow who he hosted the Late Late Show for many years. And anyway, he wrote this movie and stars in it, and it's a delight as well. Again, nice people doing nice things. In Saving Grace, there's a little bit of how should we say it, innocent crime going on, but it all gets resolved in the end. So those are my recommendations for comfort reading, comfort listening, comfort watching, and I'd love to hear yours. If you want to let me know what your favorite things are that you turn to when when things are kind of difficult, please do. I'd love to hear from you. My email address is info@alexandraamor.com, and just drop me a line and let me know what it is you're watching and listening to and reading. I'd love to hear from you. So that's about it for me. That's a longer introduction than usual, but I just wanted to sort of point in that direction and remind myself as well as you about our resilience and our well-being that lives at the center of us at all times, and also remind ourselves that there's lots of ways to comfort and nurture ourselves even when difficult things are going on in the wider world, I guess we would say. So, what else? I think that's about it. Don't forget, always remember that you can get 2 free mystery novellas at alexandraamor.com. When you go to that website, it'll be very obvious immediately how to pick up those 2 free mystery novellas from me. One is from my Freddie Lark series. It's the origin story or the prequel. And the other is the same for my Town Called Horse mystery series. And if you like the show and would like to be sort of a part of the community, that's co-creating the show, you can do that at patreon.com/It's a Mystery for less than the price of a cup of coffee each month. You can, just contribute, and that your contribution helps me to pay for the hosting for the show and also a little bit of my time. So on that note, I will leave you with Cat Clayton. I think you're going to love this interview. And again, a great example of comfort food in the form of books for these trying times. And I hope you're doing well, and I will talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Cat Clayton writes from somewhere deep in the heart of Texas, crafting a literary crossroads where mystery, humor, the paranormal, and a dash of romance intersect. She adores her family, spoils her half-dozen plus one pets, is a self-proclaimed coffee snob, and a thrift store junkie. When she's not writing, she's thinking about writing, and when she's not doing either, she attempts CrossFit. Welcome to the show, Cat. Thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you, Alexandra. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from a snippet from the audiobook that you've sent me. And then once that's done, we'll come back and have our interview.
Sounds great.
All right.
Chapter 1. I declared it pie o'clock somewhere and shoved a forkful of very scrumptious in my mouth as I attempted to decipher the troubled expression on my boyfriend's face while he spat hushed, clipped words into his cell phone. The same phone issued to him by the Buckleville Police Department. Even though I couldn't hear anything, it didn't take Sherlock to figure out the unidentified caller had delivered bad news. Trouble had arrived in Buckleville. In order to distract my curiosity, I dug in for another bite. The yummy combination of buttery crust and the yin-yang of sweet and tart touched my soul. In my book, pie made everything better. I leaned in, listening to Nick's phone call. My cheeky Chihuahua, Cuff, sat perched on my lap. His head followed my fork, back and forth, bulging amber eyes begging. Nick backed up a few paces, enough to evade my prying ears. Doggone it. Moments ago, we'd been arguing over the fact he'd caught me going through his things. Again. I couldn't help myself. Recently, I'd found a receipt for a bouquet of long-stemmed red roses from Crazy Daisy. A bouquet I'd never received. Nick's bull mastiff Trigger snoozed in the kitchen. His massive body lay sprawled on the tile floor, drooling. Cuff had been a moment of weakness while driving out of the Buckleville Foods parking lot. One glimpse at the older male pup caged in a rickety wired monstrosity, and I melted. It was love at first sight. "Who is it?" I whispered to Nick. I set my pie plate down on the counter and put Cuff on the floor. He padded over next to Trigger and collapsed. He lowered his tiny muzzle between his two front paws and eyed me. With his cell phone glued to his ear, Nick scowled. I glanced over at the framed picture of us from last Christmas. I'd met Nick Campbell last winter at the downtown holiday stroll after he'd transferred to Buckleville PD. My first real, intimate relationship, and I intended to make it last. Before Nick, I was a 25-year-old virgin, a hopeless old-school romantic. It still happens. Despite friendly advice and prayerful thought from others who thought we were moving too quickly, I tumbled head over boot heels in love. But our romance had taken a turn for bitter and questionable, like milk gone blinky. Glaring in my direction, Nick reached over and snatched the small notepad he carried while on duty. No stranger to trouble, I recognized the look. Ocean blue eyes narrowed under furrowed brows. His jaw clenched and his hand moved in quick, jerky motions as he jotted down details. "Yes, sir," Nick said. He only called one person sir, Chief Becker. And there was only one reason the chief called Nick when he was off duty. Crime. My eyes shifted to Nick's brass badge on the counter. When I closed my eyes, I could see Pop and Mama's gleamin' badges when they both served on the Buckleville PD. Pop had retired soon after Mama had her accident. I reached up, searching for the sterling silver, heart-shaped locket around my neck. It had been my mother's before she died. I opened the tiny heart, revealing a picture of me on one side and a picture of my sister, Stoney, on the other. We must have been 5 and 10 years old at the time the pictures were taken. I fastened it closed with a snap, fighting back the tears. "I got it, sir." Nick's voice yanked me back to reality, his eyes flicking in my direction, his jaw tense. I attempted to peek at his notepad as he flipped it closed. A text came through on my cell phone from my friend Daniel. "I tried to call Samson at the shop, but he won't pick up. I think I left the front door unlocked. Ugh, sorry." We lived closer to town than Daniel. I replied to his text. "No worries, I'll go check." I glanced at the keys on my countertop. 2 big eyes on the brass poodle face keychain stared back at me. 6 months ago, after my Grandma Gertie had caught her hair on fire, lighting a cigarette with the gas stove burner, she signed over her dog grooming business to me, and moved herself into a retirement home. Along with the help of Daniel, my head groomer, I was the proud owner of Scrub-a-Dub, 3 pups in a tub. Nick's sudden movement caught my attention as he ducked around the corner and disappeared into the hall. I clambered up onto the counter and pressed my ear against the wall. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping to sharpen my sense of hearing. I clearly heard Nick's harsh whispers. Murder. Dead body. Steely's shop. I inhaled, pulling the air deep into my lungs, and pushed out an audible exhale. Now was not the time to panic. I begged my asthmatic lungs to behave. I slid off the counter and robotically began wiping it down, my mind racing at a dizzying speed. Did he say murder? At the shop? A wave of nausea rolled over in the pit of my stomach. Hello? Did you hear me? Nick said, snapping his fingers. Sorry. Didn't hear you come back in. Must have been in a daze. I tossed the sponge in the sink, trying to ignore the heaviness pressing down on my lungs. Inhale. Exhale. I'll say, that countertop shines like polished chrome. Nick grabbed his keys from the hook on the wall. What is it? I asked. Police business. But I might need you to run into town later. For now, stay here and keep your phone on. He was out the front door before I could respond and tell him I needed to go check the front door of the shop. Cuff yipped at me, his sickle-shaped tail wagging. I tossed the fork into the sink, shoved the pie in the fridge, and dashed to the window. The black Dodge truck backed up, a loaded shotgun mounted in the back window, like a Texas badge of honor. I waited for Nick to turn out of the gravel drive, then hightailed it out of the kitchen. Cuff yapped, nipping at my heels. I made a beeline for the living room. Just as I reached to switch on the police scanner, Cuff tangled himself between my bare feet, sending me flying headfirst into the desk. My head cracked against the unforgiving oak. Son of a... Biscuit eater. Ugh. Agonizing pain ricocheted through my head. Dizzy, I slumped against the desk. Cuff licked my hands, offering a sincere apology. Oh, you okay, Chiquita? A squeaky voice echoed in my head. Who said that? I glanced around the room. Tiny, white flashes filled my vision, an obvious result of my head-on collision with the desk. But where did that voice come from? Right here. Where? Nobody answered, and the room was empty, except me and Cuff. I closed my eyes and patted Cuff between his ears, soothing my own frazzled nerves. His tiny head trembled beneath my hand. It's okay, little buddy. I reached up and rubbed the goose egg forming on my forehead. I think I'll survive. I heaved myself off the floor and sagged into the desk chair, switching to Station 3 of the police scanner. They mentioned the break-in at my shop. My heart skipped a beat. I monitored the female dispatcher and the officers discussing the situation and the whereabouts of the dead body. Be advised, the body has been identified. Officer Tripp says his name is Sampson. Last name unknown. No identification found on the body. The male voice sounded over the radio. Do you mean Sweater Man? The dispatcher asked. Affirmative. The victim was found in the empty apartment above Miss Lamarr's shop. Blunt force trauma to the head. I let out the breath I'd been holding and choked back a sob. Sweater Man was none other than Scrub-a-Dub's night janitor and a friend. Sampson had a gentle soul and always kept to himself. No matter what the temperature, he'd always worn sweaters. I closed my eyes and wished the news I'd heard wasn't real, that the sweet, kind man wasn't gone. I recalled the first time we met. One night last winter, after closing up the shop, we discovered Sampson and his huge black and white fluffy mongrel, a cross between a Great Pyrenees and a poodle that Daniel called a piradoodle, huddled up against the back of the building, shivering. Daniel and I invited him and his pup in for a cup of hot coffee and a dog treat. We all hit it off, and Virgil, his giant scruffy beast of a dog, was no more vicious than a mouse. Samson had agreed to clean the shop every evening after close, and in return, Virgil would get a deluxe Daniel special groom every 2 weeks. I'd invited them to bunk in Grandma Gertie's old apartment above the shop. Who would kill Samson? And what about Virgil? I said to no one. Gosh, what had happened to the massive sweet mutt? Virgil needed my help. I could feel it in my bones. Virgil? What about Virgil? Huh? I ignored the voice and tried to focus. I had to get to town and quick. I switched out my shorts and tank top for a pair of jeans and a stretchy black t-shirt. Searching around for the first pair of shoes I could find, I grinned when I spotted my favorite pair of camouflage boots. Sporting 4-inch spiked heels and zippers to my knees, the boots rocked. Besides, they added major height to my Thumbelina stature, even if the boots were murder on my feet. Rushing down the hall, I caught sight of myself in the mirror on the wall. A plumb, quarter-sized knot perched above my right eyebrow. Holy cow! I'm a train wreck. I raked my fingers through the Merlot red tufts of hair, jetting out in all directions. Hurry up, Chiquita! Oh, let's go! Disregarding the voice, I headed to the kitchen. Cuff danced around my feet. Jumping up on my leg, he wagged his tail. Such an eager little guy. I squeezed my eyes shut and counted to 10, hoping the voice would stop. Maybe I should head to the emergency clinic and have my head examined instead of looking for Virgil and checking on the shop. Hearing voices could be a sign of a concussion, or worse. I had hit the desk pretty hard. Cuff whined. I glanced into those sweet brown eyes, his head tilted to the side. I didn't mean to do it, Chiquita. I pushed the unpleasant thought of brain damage and the odd voice to the back of my mind. I grabbed my keys in my handbag, making sure my asthma inhaler was inside, and headed for the door. As I slid the glass door open, thunder rumbled. A hint of rain lingered in the air. Sweltering summer nights often spurred thunderstorms. I crossed my fingers that the bottom of the sky wouldn't fall out during my drive into town. Cuff whimpered. Sorry, boy. Not this time. Thunder boomed again. Cuff barked. I peered over at Trigger sprawled on the floor, snoring. An ocean of drool pooled around his flabby muzzle. Trigger could sleep through a hurricane. Cuff shivered, begging me with his bulging amber eyes. He cocked his head to the side. Come on, Chiquita. I'm worried about Virgil, too. My pup barked at me. Okay. I bent over and held out my hands. Cuff leaped up into my arms. I traded out the small clutch purse for a paisley sling bag and packed him safely inside. Petite women really shouldn't carry large purses, but when you're packing, a pooch that is, they come in handy. Outside, a damp earthy scent hung in the air. The humidity of the approaching rain suffocated me. The back floodlight streaming through the arching branches of the ancient oak created webbed shadows across the deck. I sprinted through them to my car. I loaded Cuff into my silver Volkswagen Bug and hit the road, driving like a madwoman.
So why don't we begin now just by you telling us a little bit about Steely. Tell us about why you were, prompted to write about her, what you like about her, that kind of thing.
Okay, well, so the idea came to me, it's got to be probably 6 years now. The character that I wanted, I was trying to craft an amateur sleuth character. I knew I wanted her to be female, and I knew I wanted a police department or some type of law enforcement aspect to be involved. And I myself am married to a police officer. We'll be married 30 years this year. So I had the idea of writing Steely as a young, mid-20s female, but I wanted to put her, I had to pick a profession that had, absolutely nothing to do with, crime. I mean, that's kind of what I picture an amateur sleuth having. So I made her a dog groomer. And the first male that we're introduced to is Nick. Now, Nick doesn't, I don't want to be a spoiler, but he doesn't last. How about we say that?
Okay.
He's not very nice. We'll be able to tell right away in the we could tell from the reading that he's definitely not a nice guy. So I don't know how to say that without spoiling. So let's go back to Steely. Steely is loosely based on my 27-year-old daughter, who works in the emergency medical services, career. That's her career. She's an EMT. And then I myself was a young wife of a police officer. And so I kind of melded her personality with old me, back in my 19, I guess I was probably 19 when we got married. I just kind of meshed all of that into one and made the character. So she's kind of a mix-up of my daughter, my older daughter, and then me as well, like old me.
Right. And I mean, I could tell right away that animals were important to you because we were only in the first part of chapter 1 and we've already met 2 dogs.
2 dogs. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, throughout the 3 books, and I'm writing book 4, I've counted 23 dogs so far, or animals so far. They're not all dogs that show up in the stories, but most of them are dogs because it is a dog. She owns a dog grooming shop. She actually takes it over from her grandparents. So, but we do see other animals that show up in the shop.
Great.
And some fun, quirky ones.
Oh, good. Yeah. That's great. And we were talking just before we started to record about little I don't know if paranormal is the right word, unusual elements that we've both introduced to some of our books. And one of them, as we heard in that excerpt, is that Steely begins to hear Cuff's voice. So what was the impetus for that?
Well, okay. So, when I wrote the first draft, it did not have that element in there. We had Cuff. He was a Chihuahua, and he had all the Chihuahua qualities that Cuff has now, except she didn't hear his thoughts. Now, okay, so the original draft actually had her mother's spirit talking to her because her mother is deceased, and we learned that right away with the locket. She goes for the locket in chapter 1. So, and then she kind of drops in a little bit of a backstory there, but at first it was going to be that element, and I don't know, it just didn't seem for me in this story. It didn't seem quirky enough. And so I had read a book, and it was a mystery book, and I want to say it was written, I read the first in her series. I want to say it was J.B. Lynn, and she wrote the Hit Woman series. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. But
oh, yeah, I think I have.
She was in a car wreck, and she hears all animal voices. And I just remember what a riot that was. And I had read, book 1, and I thought, okay, well, she has this Chihuahua here who has a quirky personality already. And why not try to throw some sort of, and I kind of used it as like a little bit of a fantasy element at first. But the other thing that I was kind of going for was, so she only hears his thoughts. So when she bumps her head on the desk, does she have a little bit of a TBI? I mean, does she have, so is it her imagination? Nobody else can hear him. Nobody else gets those thoughts. And she certainly doesn't hear, other animals' thoughts. So I wanted it to be left up to the reader if it was really his thoughts or if it's, in her mind. So if it's something that she's kind of created on her own. So, yeah, I just thought it was a fun element. So
nice. Well, I thought it was too. I like it. I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about Buckleville too.
Okay.
It's set in Texas, correct? Where you are?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I always say somewhere in Texas.
Right.
Somewhere in the great state of Texas. Yeah. So Buckleville is, so we live in a very rural community, and there are small towns kind of dotted all over the map in this region of Texas. And I will say we're, South Central Texas. And so there's a lot of small towns within a 50-mile radius of my home that we frequent all the time. And they're all charming. They all have their own little unique qualities, their own, set of small town, folks and the community and the people that live there. And so what I've done is I've taken probably, I want to say 5 or 6 of our towns out here, including my own hometown, and kind of meshed them together and tried to pick and choose little pieces of each of the communities that I know and created Buckleville. And Buckleville, there's a lot of B names, the B town names that are in our community. And for some reason and then it's kind of quirky and funny because it, like a belt buckle, and there's a lot of something Villes in our area. So it just fit. Yeah. So I kind of smacked it dab right in the middle of like our community.
Great. Well,
I know somebody, I had a reader ask me, they're like, I can't find Buckleville on the map. Where is Buckleville?
Oh, that's great.
I mention our hometown and I mention area towns, but, and then like, Austin and Houston are mentioned in the books. But they're like, I can't find it on the map. Where is it? I'm like, it's fictional.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I thought the name was absolutely perfect for a little Texas town, Buckleville. Yes. Brilliant. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
And I imagine that perhaps there might be some interesting Texan characters, people who get interwoven as well.
Oh, yes. Yes. We have some, and I know that every area, in the world probably has its own unique quality of people. But boy, yeah, a lot of the characters that I've brought into the books, I've taken a quirk from somebody I've met. I'm a people watcher. I can sit in an airport or a coffee shop and I'm not eavesdropping per se. Well, maybe I am, but I just, people's dialogue and their dialect and their mannerisms and their quirkiness, I absorb all of that and I'll write it down. I always keep notebooks with me. And so, yeah, there's a lot of people that I know, kind of dropped into these characters. So yeah. I have readers that are from this community and they always ask me, I think I know who Mrs. Peacock is. And I'm like, really? Because she's about 6 people.
Yes.
So, yeah. And it's funny because, I think that's one of the great things about being a writer is that, they always say, write what you know, or write what you love, or write what, but I write what I experience and the things that I've, either dealt with in life or seen in life or heard. And I just, so I basically write my life and experience. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And people often ask me the same question, I think I know who so-and-so is based on, but as authors, we can never make it that obvious because it could be offensive to the person who reads about. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I don't want to offend anybody.
No.
I definitely don't want to do that. But, people are interesting.
Yes.
And there are, they're colorful. And so, yeah, it's fun. I love my favorite part of writing the books is developing the characters and the town and the descriptions of, those types of things. I just find it a very creative process coming up with the characters. Yeah.
Yeah. So say more about that. So what do you like coming up with? Is it their motivation or their quirks?
Their quirks.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have my own quirks. And so, I used to get offended when somebody would say, oh, she's quirky or you're kind of eccentric. And I used to get a little offended by that, but boy, does it set me apart from like the norm. Mm-hmm. And I am not, I don't want to be normal, because what is normal? Boring. So I've kind of embraced my quirky weirdness, and I think it's a very rich quality to have. So I like to give those type, and sometimes I just make them up. I have one of the characters he shows up in all three of the books, but he rides a like an old fashioned like bicycle, and it's got a basket on the front that he has made into a garden. And he grows seasonal flowers or vegetables inside his basket garden that he rides. And he has a little bell that he rings. And I totally made that up out of my head. I just thought that was a really interesting quirk to have. So, yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the 3 books there. So we heard an excerpt from How to Leash a Thief. Right. The second book is How to Kennel a Killer.
Yes. And then the third.
Yeah.
Okay, it's How to Fetch a Felon.
How to Fetch a Felon, right. And so do you have plans for more? Are those in the works? Yeah.
Yes. But before I've already drafted it. And so I'm working on kind of tweaking it a little bit before I send it off to the developmental editor. It is called How to Muzzle a Mobster. And it's actually an extra book. So the series, I only really wanted to be 3 books.
Oh, okay.
And there's an overall story arc that goes all the way from books 1 to 3. And we finished that up in book 3. But so many of my readers, I tried to start on another, and I have started on another series, a paranormal series, but so many of my readers wanted more from Steely and Cuff. So I decided to write extras. So at this point, I have 5. I have 4 and 5 kind of in the works. Book 4 will be out the fall of this year. So the fall of 2020.
Great. Well, that's such a nice endorsement that your fans want more.
Yes. Yeah. Well, they want more Steely, or they want more. So she does have she does end up having another male in her life. And so they want more him, and they want more of, Gertie, her grandmother, and they want more Cuff. And so, yeah, I really, I had come up with probably 10 titles when I wrote How to Leash a Thief. I just kept going on with the verbs and, with the whole dog theme, verbs in the titles. And then, so I have 10 titles complete.
Oh, wow.
I don't have 10. I don't have them all, outlined or mapped or anything like that, but I do have a total of 10 titles that I have in my story note, in my series notebook.
Yeah.
So, yeah, who knows?
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you think you'll write them all? But I guess you don't know yet.
I don't know yet. I'm having a lot of fun. One of my readers gave me the suggestion that they would like to see stories from different characters. So, like one of the stories from maybe, the grandmother's perspective, because she's a hoot. When you guys get to meet Gertie, she's just a hoot and a half. And she's actually based on my husband's grandmother, whose name was Gertrude. So, yeah, and she was quite the character herself. So,
oh, nice.
Yeah, so they want books from, maybe from Gertie's perspective, or Jackson's, perspective, which is the other male character. It would be kind of fun to have one from Cuff. I'm just saying, So, yeah. So who knows? Who knows how far it'll go?
Well, isn't that nice to have have that? I feel like it's a kind of a wide open landscape that you can explore. That's awesome.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It is. It's like the land, and the landscape is there for my picking. You right? Yeah. It's just great. Yeah. So I'm enjoying it for sure.
Fantastic. Oh, that's great. So, Kat, this has been lovely. And why don't you let our listeners know where they can find out more about you and your books?
Okay, great. They can find me at my website, and it's www.catclayton.com. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as Cat Clayton Mysteries. So it's all one. So at Cat Clayton Mysteries. And then the other place, so I do have a Twitter account. I don't tweet. I've tried to I'm terrible at Twitter. What I tried to do was I tried to pick and choose the social media outlets and channels that I was strong with and that I prefer and that I'm most comfortable with. And Twitter, I'm not very comfortable with Twitter. So Facebook, Instagram, Cat Clayton Mysteries. And then they can also follow me on Amazon and on BookBub.
Great.
And those two places are really nice to follow Cat Clayton because they will alert you in an email when I come out with a new book. And I do have another series I'm working on. So my plan is to release 2 books a year, one from each series. So yeah, it'll send them a little alerts when there's a new book out.
Right. Yes. And the other one you mentioned, it's paranormal. Is it mysteries as well?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So those are based on Texas lore and legends and ghost stories. We have down in Texas, we have just a plethora. And I know all areas do, but we have the Chupacabra. We have Bigfoot in East Texas. We have the Marfa Lights in West Texas. And we have all these different ghost stories. So it's, and I will be traveling to each of the areas and kind of experiencing them on my own. And then I will fictionalize a story about it. So yeah, the first one comes out in June this year.
Nice. Okay.
Yes.
Great. Awesome.
Yes.
And by the way, I'll put links to what you've mentioned in the show notes as well. So
that is awesome. Thank you so much.
People can find that too. Yeah. Well, it's been lovely chatting with you. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Alexandra.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. You can always find episode show notes and links to the books mentioned on the show at itsamysterypodcast.com. While you're there, you can also grab your copies of 2 free mystery novellas by me, Alexandra Amour. Until next time, happy reading!